Okay, welcome everyone. I, Council President Walsh, call the September 29th Committee of the Whole meeting to order at 6:32 p.m. As a reminder, we continue to have, years after the pandemic, a remote aspect to our meetings, and both staff and members of the public may be participating remotely via WebEx. There will be multiple public comment opportunities at tonight's meeting. First, there is a general public comment opportunity at the beginning of the meeting, or you can make comments after the presentation of each of the items and the council question and answer period on any of tonight's agenda items. So we will start with public comment. Members of the public may address council at this time in person or virtually. Those who signed up in advance to make comment will be called on first. If you are joining us virtually and would like to make comments, please raise your virtual hand. If you're on the phone, that's going to be pressing *3. If you're on a computer or smartphone, look for the hand icon, or you can send the host a chat message. If you're in the room and did not sign up, I will ask for other speakers. Clerk, we have people signed up. Great. You are invited to address council regarding matters that are directly related to Issaquah's programs, projects, services, or events. Comments related to political campaigns are not permitted. That's a lot of P's. Please direct comments to the whole council and not individuals. And while this isn't a question and answer session, so we aren't able to reply to you, we will contact you to follow up if needed and if you provide your information. When recognized, if you're virtual, unmute your microphone, or if you're in person, step up to the lectern and press the button so that the microphone turns red. State your name, address, and relationship to the city. Speak clearly and pause frequently, and limit your comments to 5 minutes. If you're attending virtually and do not respond to your name or phone number, or if your connection is lost unexpectedly, we will need to move on, but please rejoin if you are able. Personal attacks, obscene language, derogatory remarks, and disruptive behavior will not be permitted. Clerk, can you identify the first person who has signed up to speak?
Yes, Kaylee Jake.
Kaylee, come on up.
Hi, my name is Kaylee Jake. I live at 24706 Southeast 30th Street, Sammamish, and I'm the executive director of the Garage, and I'm here to make public comment, regarding MetroFlex. So I know that's on your docket for today, and I just want to speak to you briefly about the point of view of teens that use MetroFlex. So we regularly have teens that use it, and they're using it so that they can access resources at the garage after school and then still get home. Many of our teens can't access the activity bus and then would be unable to get back to their homes in time, whether it's working at a job or back home to take care of their younger siblings. And when they're at the garage, they're accessing essential resources. So we're talking about case management, therapy, basic needs such as food and clothing. We're seeing more than 100 kids come through our doors every day now that school's up and running. And I think MetroFlex is really essential part of what the community offers in way of support. So I see this as an investment in the community. And when I'm looking through the presentation today, I understand that $40 a ride is a lot to ask. But I want you to consider that this is a newer program. I think we could do a better job of publicizing it, which would, if we had more riders, we would see a lower cost per ride. And I also want you to compare it to, if I have to call a cab for one of the teams, I'm spending $35 to $40 for that ride. So when you invest in this, it might not be equal, but it is equitable. And I think that our community, I mean, not only is it we're moving towards green transportation, but I actually think we should be expanding MetroFlex. There's much more that we could be doing with this to really provide some essential transportation services for our most marginalized community members. So I'm just speaking about teens, but I know our seniors need to use this as well, low-income folks as well. So there's a lot to consider, but I really would encourage you to think about the investment and the equitable investment that this means for our city. Thank you.
Thank you, Kaylee. Do you have anybody else signed up to speak?
Yes, Ann Fletcher.
Anne, come on up.
Great. Good evening. I'm Ann Fletcher. I'm a resident at 255 Southeast Andrews Street and a member of People for Climate Action. I too would like to speak about extending or renewing the MetroFlex contract. I believe it should be renewed for 2026 and 27 since it has to be a 2-year contract, I read. MetroFlex, I believe, also is a good investment in our Issaquah Climate Action Plan transportation section because it encourages transit. The map that was in the report shows that many people use it to get to the transit center. Otherwise would not be able to get there. Transportation is a really hard area to reduce greenhouse gas emissions because we don't have a lot of control over some of the things like pass-through traffic and when our light rail is going to come, but we do have some control over this. And it seems we should use and address the areas where we do have control. And this is one area where we do. MetroFlex scores well on equity, as you've already heard, accessible to all and especially helpful to those who may not have other means, disabled, economically disadvantaged, and teens. I think it is, I think that equity is a part of our climate action plan too. So we know it affects people differently. So MetroFlex's contribution to economic sustainability was not mentioned in the report, but I would like to bring up the idea that the rides bring folks from outlying areas into central Issaquah, where they can take advantage of the businesses and shopping, and that's also shown on the map. There's a lot of circles on the shopping areas that people go to. I think it's difficult to compare Issaquah with other places that have MetroFlex. Many of them have had MetroFlex for longer than Issaquah, and we don't know the size of the area that they're covering, and it may be smaller than what we have to cover, and therefore they can get more rides in. Issaquah has not had the pilot long enough, I don't think, to fully evaluate it. So we've already invested some. I think we should continue to invest in it. We should provide a couple more years to try it out, tweak it, and collect data. The city administration indicates that the person in charge of initiating or promoting the program is no longer here. And so if needed, and maybe it's already been done, another staff member could be assigned to promoting it and collecting the data that the council might need to make a decision. The City Council previously directed the administration to continue MetroFlex, and we already have $200,000 for 2026, so we need that extra $58,000. I believe there's time to explore priorities to adjust the 2027 budget to cover the rest of the contract. So if the council decides to let MetroFlex expire, that $200,000 needs to be thought about. Perhaps it should be allocated to go toward the ICAP actions that would reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Dropping MetroFlex leaves a climate, congestion, equity gap in our transportation system without providing a viable solution to replace it. Other options listed on the chart in the report have issues, such as cost and risk and equity and so forth. But advocating for more transit from elsewhere which is mentioned as an alternative, has been done for years without success. And so sometimes I think we need to look to ourselves. Here's an opportunity for the Transportation Department to partner with the Sustainability Department. And think about other communities like North Bend that are even smaller than ours that support a locally run bus or shuttle connections. There are other examples in the report that I sent you via email of other places that are doing things that help increase the accessibility of transit. And so I believe that for the future, yes, we need to work on other things, tweak things, but for right now, MetroFlex is our best option. And Issaquah is a strong environmental city and should invest financially. And I am done. Thank you. Perfect timing.
Thanks, Ann. Do we have anybody else signed up to speak?
We don't, and we do have a few members of the public with us virtually, but I don't see them indicating a desire to speak at this time.
Okay, just a reminder that you can press, what is it, *3 if you're on a smartphone, or if you're on a phone, or if you are on a computer or smart device, raise your virtual hand, or send the host a chat message, and I will just wait a moment to see if anybody else signs up. But it's looking like not. Well, I know council very much appreciates hearing from members of the public, and it sounded like we had some strong advocacy for the MetroFlex program for various reasons there. Moving on with our agenda, we've got COM 0178, amendments to financial policy and travel and procurement card policies, after which will come the MetroFlex piece. So we will start with Kristen Garcia, our finance director. Thanks.
Thank you, Council President, and good evening, members of the council, and good evening, members to the public that are viewing virtually and those that are attending in person. Kristen Garcia, Finance Director here at the City, and tonight I'm going to talk to Council about proposed amendments to the financial management policies, meals and travel policy, and the procurement card policy. The purpose of the policy updates are to address ambiguities. Sometimes there's situations that come up that the policies doesn't specifically address, or the policy language isn't clear, and while we can't accommodate every unique situation in the financial policies, we want to try to provide as much clarification as we can to those common occurrences that happen. We also want to reflect current practices and processes. Our financial management policies are intended to provide an internal control and oversight, while at the same time we want to make sure that those aren't so restrictive and cumbersome that we're prohibiting the departments from operating effectively and efficiently. And we also seek internal feedback because policy updates can have impacts onto the operations of the departments. So we want to consider their feedback on anything that is brought forward. And of course, we also want to consider past and current audit recommendations and best practices, again, to make sure that we're managing the appropriate level of internal control. So for tonight, administration is seeking input from the Committee of the Whole on the proposed updates for the financial management policies, the travel and meals policy, and the procurement card policy. Just a little bit of background before I get started in the updates. The financial management policies were originally adopted in 2017 and have been periodically updated since that time. The two most recent updates occurred in January of 2024 when the updates focused on grants, donations, and the contracting thresholds. The policy was then updated again in June of 2024, focusing on change orders and retainage. The procurement policy and travel and meals policy were both last updated in 2021, so those are actually due for an update. In terms of the financial management policy updates, the ones that I'm going to go over right now don't change any threshold or authority levels. These were mainly intended to clean up language and provide some clarity. The first item, for example, we want to update titles Throughout the document, it references Chief Financial Officer. The title that we're currently using is Financial Director. We're also using language like master plan throughout the document. We're updating that to refer to action plan, as that is the current verbiage that we're using. We also want to incorporate current authority levels for the presiding judge and court administrator. This is not new authority. Those are equivalent to director or manager level positions, although those titles aren't specifically named within the policy. So we just thought we would incorporate those titles to make it absolutely clear that that authority is granted to those positions. We also wanted to clarify some conflict of interest in accepting of gifts. For example, there could be an employee attending a conference or otherwise engaging in a vendor where they might get a water bottle or a tote bag or something to that effect that doesn't really pose a conflict of interest. It doesn't result in personal gain, but that is a common practice that happens. And so we just wanted to clarify that in those particular instances that those types of things are okay. We also wanted to add legal and other references, like references to specific RCWs that apply to a part of the policy, or references to like IRS publications. So the next part of the financial management policy updates are establishing new levels of authority. We want to add a provision to allow the city to use an indirect cost rate on federal grants. This is something that the city does not currently have in its policy, and it hasn't been a past practice. The purpose of an indirect cost rate is to allow for cost recovery for administration of the grant. It is allowed under the uniform guidance at the federal level. However, if the city does not have an indirect cost rate included in city policy, then if we do want to add an indirect cost rate to the grant application, then we need to go to the granting agency in order to include that. So for best practices, if it's something that we think we might want to do, it would streamline the process to have the policy included. The policy would be 15%. That's currently what the federal law allows. The second item is we're removing secondary council approval for purchases of supplies, materials, and equipment for items specifically identified in the budget. What that means is, for example, we have a fleet replacement schedule. So we have identified all the different pieces of vehicles and equipment, an estimated timeline on when that needs to be replaced, and estimated cost for replacement. That schedule is used as a tool then as we prepare the budget. So we identify in the budget how much we're intending to spend for vehicle replacement. Under this policy, for example, if we had 5 police cars and a dump truck that were identified on a fleet schedule for 2026, we included those costs in the budget. Council adopted the budget. At the time of purchase, it wouldn't require staff to come back then and ask for secondary approval to purchase those pieces of equipment. When council would need to approve a purchase is if say a backhoe was planned for replacement in 2029, staff decided they wanted to replace that in 2026. Well, those costs, that wasn't identified in the 2026 schedule, those costs weren't included in the budget, that item would have to come before council for approval. The last item is adding language to allow administrative approval with prior notice to council up to $50,000. What this would look like is if there's a minor but monetary collective bargaining agreement adjustment that needs to be made, up to $50,000, that could be administratively approved with notice to council. So it wouldn't require formal council action, but council would certainly be informed and have input into that decision. Next part of the policy updates relate to travel and meals, and most of this is, except for one item, is just clarifying our current practices and cleaning up language. We wanted to add language to confirm documentation that's required for claiming reimbursement. Departments already know what that documentation is, but we thought we would take an opportunity and just kind of spell that out to make sure it's really clear on what documentation is required for those things. We also want to incorporate current unauthorized expenses. Again, these aren't new. These have already been prohibited purchases. Things like trip insurance, seat upgrades for airfare, alcohol, fines, forfeits have currently been unauthorized, but since we were doing policy updates, we just wanted to make it super clear and add that language in there. Also wanted to do clarification on per diem rates. It's been current practice and in policy to allow exceptions for the per diem rates if the accommodations are part of a conference, conference meals do not meet the employee's dietary restrictions, or the traveler can claim less than the per diem rate and receipts aren't required. What is new is we're proposing an exception to exceed the per diem rates by 20% if an explanation is provided in city administrator approval. Excuse me. What that would look like is there are certain instances at the executive and the elected level where you have regional meetings, the venue and the meal might not be an option. The food might not be an option in terms of cost, and so we don't want to prohibit the conduct of business, so we want to make sure that we have a provision where you can still attend those things where business is being conducted while still meeting the parameters of the law. Thank you. Excuse me. Okay. Procurement card policy updates. Most of these are, again, clarifying, and there's a couple of new items that we've included. We wanted to add a procurement card custodian agreement. So what our current practice is, we have instances where we issued a procurement card to an individual. Those are individuals that do more purchasing than others. So they have a card directly issued to them and they have a user agreement. We also have situations where we issue a card at the department level and there's a custodian that checks out the cards to individuals on an as-needed basis. The direct card holder and the custodian have a varying levels of responsibility, so we thought it would be a best practice to have a custodian agreement. A new internal control that we're adding is that the finance director will inventory procurement cards at least once every 2 years. We wanted to add that in there as an extra layer of internal control. Procurement cards tend to be at a high risk for fraud and theft, so we thought that would be a good practice to incorporate that. We also want to give a little bit more flexibility to departments when vendors are requiring payment of time of service. So in the case of someone needs to make a purchase for advertising or a sign, oftentimes the vendor will not start work unless the vendor is paid at time of service. Under our current practice and policy, if a vendor has an account or relationship already with the city of Issaquah, that vendor invoices us, that goes to the accounts payable process, and then we cut the check. That can take a couple of weeks to go through that process. Well, if a department is needing that sign to be done and finished before that amount of time, that's prohibiting them from getting their done work on a timely manner. So what this policy would do will allow that in certain circumstances for the procurement card to be used at time of service, to make sure that the departments can operate a little bit more effectively and timely. So that concludes the policy updates. In terms of timing and next steps. Pending committee feedback, the policy amendments will be brought to the City Council on November 10th for adoption. And then at this time, I'd be happy to take input, answer any questions. We also want direction on whether this item can return on consent agenda or if it should be on a regular business item on November 10th.
Thank you. Looking to council, do we have any questions? I know some were asked over email, so some things have been clarified. But is there anything we want to ask questions here? Councilmember Ray?
I'd love to get us started. What's the current audit process for the P cards? I'm sorry, what's the current audit process or review process for the purchasing cards?
It's quite thorough. So it usually just starts at the department level. So it's submitting at the departments. They do a review. They submit it to our procurement an AP, accounts payable person, and they do a review, and then at some levels, I also do a review before it's approved. That is specifically related to the purchase itself. That's why we're adding the additional control of reviewing the inventory, credit limits, and those types of things.
So there, and this is fine, I'm glad we're adding it, but there's no existing kind of review of the inventory of cards and credit limits right now. So the controls are really on managing the spend post-spend.
There's not like a formal periodic review, correct?
That was my question. Thanks a lot.
Yes.
Any other questions from council members? No? Okay. And it sounds like you want to make sure, I think we're probably okay to go on consent unless anyone has a reason it should go on regular business. Oh, that's a good point. Public comment. Do we have any public comment on our financial, travel, and procurement card policies? Maybe not as enticing to the community as MetroFlex, but, you know, we're doing the important work here. I am not seeing any, and none online, so any concerns with going on consent?
I don't know, but do you want any other comments too?
Oh, yeah,
I
I'll
have
take other comments.
too.
I appreciate it.
This is my thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just gonna, I'm going down a track, and I think procurement cards are a super valuable tool for any organization, but they're also super risky. And so my only thinking is I'm not sure that 2 years is certainly better than not doing any kind of reviews and inventory. I'm just not sure that 2 years is frequent enough. So I wouldn't be at all opposed. Matter of fact, I'd be very supportive of the notion of doing something on an annual basis. So that was my only thought about the policy was how do we build the controls in, because though we hire the bestest people, you know, every once in a while you get a bad actor and then bad things happen, and we want to prevent that from being an opportunity.
Okay. I'm happy to make that change in the policy that'll be brought forward to council November 10th.
That'd be great.
Madam Chair, Madam Council President, just to ask Councilmember Ray, what are you getting at? What's the concern that cards are, because an inventory would be, I think, my understanding is to physically see the cards. Are you concerned? Explain to me more what the concern is.
My concern is about good financial policy and good financial controls, and implementing a control every 2 years doesn't seem adequate to me. So and I believe there's a need to inventory the cards and make sure that we know who has the cards, and make sure that the people who have the cards have a need to have the card. And so putting a control in that you're going to do every 2 years is a big gap. And so I would like to see some control put in that has a shorter time frame than every 2 years, if we think that that's an important control. And I personally think it's a super important control, because they're credit cards, and you can do things, and if no controls are in place, then how do we know that we're not having bad actors?
So, and maybe this got lost in the presentation, but each statement is reviewed by the supervisor every month. So every transaction is reviewed by someone who's their boss. I mean, for example, how many do I review? 12, 15 credit card statements a month.
Yeah, so if it's not a problem, then you don't know to do it every 2 years. If it is a problem, or if it is a risk, then consider doing it something more frequent than every 2 years. So if you're telling me it's not a risk, then that's fine, sort of. But if it is a risk, then I don't think 2 years is adequate.
And I'm just trying to figure out, what are we reviewing more regular? Are we reviewing the person who's holding the card, and how, because we're reviewing every transaction every month.
Yeah. So I think the answer goes back to you. What were you planning on reviewing every 2 years?
And I think it was just to make sure that for those cards that weren't being used at all, because we're only obviously looking at the transactions for things that are happening. If they're not happening, then we could say, okay, does this person still need a card? I think that's what you were looking to do. And if you're concerned about that, then we can absolutely do that once a year. But as far as just oversight, we oversee every month, every transaction. A supervisor is reviewing every transaction and then has the opportunity to question each transaction. Now, it's all post-fact, but if there's fraud, we're seeing it before the bills are paid, because what the process is that the supervisor sees the bill before payment is authorized. So we can catch something before the credit card's actually paid off. I'm just trying to figure out exactly, I want to do what you want, I'm just trying to understand it better.
No, I think you understand it. I don't think that's actually true at all. I mean, if it's important, do it regularly. If it's not important, don't do it. So 2 years is a ridiculous amount of time to do anything. It's just so long. So if this is something important to inventory the cards, like you say, then do it annually at least. If it's not important, then don't do it. If we feel like the financial controls are in place to make sure we don't make bad payments, great. But don't do something that's performative or perfunctory. Do it so it has an impact.
So we'll review the cards once a year.
Okay, that language will be reflected.
Okay. Made a good point about making sure that I collect any feedback. Is there any other feedback that anybody had based on this policy? No? Okay. Kristen, very much appreciate that you are pulling this together for us. Love seeing you do the work as a new finance director and all of those areas. I think it's probably okay to go back on consent, so I'll give you that direction as well. Anything else you need from us?
That's it. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so that was our first item. Our second item on our agenda is COM 0176, the MetroFlex contract update, presented by Andrea Lerner, our Deputy City Administrator. Andrea, take it away for us. Thanks.
Hi, good evening. Thank you so much. I am Andrea Lerner, Deputy City Administrator. With me this evening are a couple of our representatives from King County Metro, including Amanda Pleasant-Brown and Meredith Sampson. And I just want to extend thanks for making the trek to Issaquah and for all their help in preparing this presentation. Next slide, please, Tisha. Thank you. So the purpose of this evening is for us to provide an update on the MetroFlex services for council, how they've been operating over the past year. And we also would like feedback as to whether the city should renew our contract with King County Metro for MetroFlex for the 2026 and 2027 years. And so that is the direction that we're seeking tonight. Should the administration proceed with renewing the MetroFlex services contract? And just a note that it is a 2-year contract. And so if council provided us that direction this evening, we would need to identify an additional almost $58,000 for 2026. We have some money budgeted for a transit services contract, but we did not fully fund it last year when the council adopted the budget. So we would need to find some additional funds, and then it would also include fully funding the contract in 2027, which is another about $260,000. Background for MetroFlex actually extends way farther into the past than 2021. Council may recall that the city of Issaquah used to have a different type of partnership with Metro. We had a circulator within Issaquah, mostly on the valley floor, but also extended to the highlands in the later years, called the Route 200. That was a circulator, a shuttle service that was just within city limits. It was free to riders to use, and the partnership started off with the city covering the fare box portion of revenues for Metro, and then in the later years, Metro stopped requiring that of us, and so it was free for the city and free for any of the riders to partake. That circulator route, the Route 200, got canceled in 2020 with a lot of other transit cancellations, and was not highly utilized, which is why it was canceled, and hadn't been really since its inception, but we had been really wanting it to be successful and had worked hard with Metro on trying to make that route successful. So Route 200 got canceled, and we had been looking at what are these other options, especially to try to connect the neighborhoods of Tallis and Squawk better to the transit center and better to services on the valley floor, since there really were no transit services in those neighborhoods. And so that is what kind of spurred a lot of our conversations in looking at how can we provide better transit connections for folks. And as you see from this timeline, that really led to the fall of 2023 launching MetroFlex. We considered a lot of options between 2020 and 2023. I'll get to those in the next slide, but that's when we decided on MetroFlex, and it launched in fall of 2023. So last year, as council may recall, it was a tough budget cycle for us, and we had to make a lot of cuts to our expenditures, including layoffs and cuts to staff, and that included reducing the MetroFlex budget. And the administration came to council last year with concerns about funding for this service. We also, as part of our budget decisions, laid off the staff member that supported this program. We also had applied for a grant to help fund the city portion of these services, but we were unsuccessful. And here we are, and at the end of this year, the MetroFlex contract is set to expire, which brings us to here tonight. Should we renew? Should we not renew? Some of the options we explored in 2021, we really looked at 3 different options. One is this on-demand pilot partnership with Metro that turned into MetroFlex. The other that council contemplated was a city-run shuttle that we would invest in a third-party system directly instead of through Metro. And we also looked at a partnership with a company like Uber or Lyft to provide on-demand rides in Issaquah. And at the time we used these criteria to evaluate them, we had conversations with the Transportation Advisory Board and the Mobility and Infrastructure Committee and ultimately Council. And there are different concerns, which led us to TAB at the time, Transportation Advisory Board, highly preferred MetroFlex, and Council ended up agreeing with them. As you can see, these are all, this is the same table that we used in those conversations in 2021. So what that means is a cost to city per year, for example, if you look at that column, the MetroFlex square estimates the cost to be 100 to 200,000. Well, now we know it's about 260,000 per year. So this is not a current table. This is the table that we used at the time to help us evaluate options. That means that if we wanted to revisit some of these options, we would need to have a little bit more time to be able to update the cost estimates especially, and to explore other partnerships like with Uber and Lyft. So we have not updated this table or talked to Uber or Lyft or any other, or examined a city-run shuttle since 2021. So a little update on how the service is going in the city. As you can see from this chart, from the first quarter of 24 through the second quarter of 25, ridership has somewhat been stable between 2,600 to maybe about 3,400 rides per quarter. And popular pickup locations, these vary depending on a time of year. I think if we were to give this presentation last year, we had different pickup locations that were popular. This is really looking at more recent data, and the top spots include the Issaquah Transit Center, the Issaquah High School, the Issaquah Commons, and the Rosecrest Apartments in Tallis. So you can see from this map, the gray dots are the less popular pickup spots, all the way up to the large purple and dark purple spots. Those are the more popular pickup spots. Some recent performance as well. So if we look at rides on a weekly basis, on average, that's about 40 rides on a weekly basis. And rides, we also look at per vehicle hour per van, so that's about 2.1 rides. It's important to note that in MetroFlex, there's also shared rides. And so as we look at percentage of shared trips, that's 55% of all trips for MetroFlex and Issaquah are shared with another rider. And that helps us get towards the goal of reducing congestion and reducing greenhouse gases. Cost per ride, this is a total cost per ride for Metro and the city at $40.71. So that's not the cost to the city, that's the total cost of providing the service. If we looked at the cost to the city provides about 70% of the costs of MetroFlex services. And so it is less, and it's more around $30 per ride. And of course, that changes depending on ridership. Also on this chart, you see percentage of trips in EPAs. EPAs here means equity priority areas. So there's a number of factors that determine an equity priority area, including incomes and other things. So we know that the percentage of trips, 25% of the trips on MetroFlex in Issaquah are in equity priority areas. And average wait time from when they hail the ride to when the ride shows up is 23 minutes. Another piece of information for council's consideration is how well is Issaquah performing compared to its peers? MetroFlex services are offered in other communities across King County, and we have among the lower utilization rates if we look at vehicle rides per vehicle hour. And so we can see that we're just below Sammamish there. Also looking at, again, what is that percentage of uses within the equity priority areas? Of course, our launch date was in October 2023. It's a little bit later than some cities, but most recently, North Shore is a new city or a new area that's been added. So really there's two options that we're asking for council to consider tonight: renew or not renew the MetroFlex contract. There may be other guidance council gives us about other options, but that's really the essential question for us tonight. So as we look at whether we would renew, part of those new terms includes 3,700 vehicle operation hours, same as the current contract, no changes there. Also the days and times, Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 6 p.m., and Saturday, 9 to 6. The cost is a little different though. Our current contract is $262,000 and change. The cost per year is going down a little bit with the new contract, and that's because it doesn't include the startup costs that were required for the first time around. So we're able to save on some of those startup costs, even though the cost per hour has increased slightly from the current contract. As we look at those costs of service and do a breakdown to determine how are King County Metro and the City of Issaquah sharing some of these costs, as I said, the City of Issaquah accounts for about 70% of the costs. Metro that accounts for about 30% of the costs. That doesn't include all of Metro's overhead. That's really looking at just the operation of the vehicle. So it doesn't include our friends here tonight and their time necessarily. And so we can see the difference in cost between the current contract and the proposed contract, again, going from $262,000 to $257,000 as the city's portion. Our recommendation tonight, at this point, the administration does not recommend renewing the MetroFlex contract due to our ongoing funding concerns. Our funding situation has not changed since council adopted the budget last year, and we're concerned about the ability to continue to pay for these services in relation to other city and community needs. Should we proceed with the administration's recommendation, that means that the contract would expire on December 31st. The city would of course, continue to advocate for Metro and Sound Transit service expansion in Issaquah, but we just would not be subsidizing this service, and we would be losing the MetroFlex services within the city limits. So direction needed, again, is should the administration renew the MetroFlex services contract, or should we not renew the contract?
To renew or not to renew, that is the question. Sorry, I had to. We will start with council question and answer. So would anybody like to start us out? Okay, great. Councilmember Hall, then Councilmember Jing.
Okay, I have a couple, if that's okay. So I sent you one, oh, thank you for the presentation. Thank you for all the work, and thanks for being with us tonight. I sent you one question over email around ridership broken out by Squawk and Tallis, which were like you said, some of kind of the main problem we were trying to solve was that last mile between those neighborhoods. And you sent me back the map, and I just want to make sure I was reading it right. So it looks like there is, like you said, there's that apartment complex in Tallis that does have high ridership and is participating in the program, but maybe not so much Squawk. Did I read that map right?
That's correct.
Okay. Okay, so next question. So the grant that we applied for, we were unsuccessful in that. Just generally, what's our sense of kind of general grant availability in this space? What does that landscape look like right now?
Not great, getting worse. That's the general, summary. Other communities are more successful in getting grants. I know there was a mention of our neighbors to the east. Largely, that's because they have access to different types of grants due to the rural nature of those communities, and also income or average income for those communities that we just do not have.
Okay, thank you. And then I'm just curious, does Metro survey MetroFlex users on some sort of cadence at all? I'm just curious if there's any Issaquah data, or maybe that's something coming up.
Metro does a regular rider and non-rider survey. They can speak to the cadence of that survey, and they are able to pull out some of the data to reflect Issaquah and some MetroFlex use. So they do have some of that. If you have more specific questions, I would love to refer to them.
That would be great, yeah, because I'd be really curious if there are any questions that are asked around what would you do otherwise? Like if this service was provided, do you have a way to get to the transit center to get to where you need to go? Or if there are any other kinds of questions that help us kind of peek into the mind of the rider a little bit.
Hi, Meredith Sampson, Transportation Planner with King County Metro. Thanks for having me. We do the rider, non-rider survey that Andrea mentioned twice a year. We haven't asked questions specific to MetroFlex on that in the most recent surveys. But I know in probably a year and a half to 2 years ago, we did ask that question of what would you do otherwise, but it probably won't get at the Issaquah community given that MetroFlex here has been running for 2 years. Additionally, we just released a survey to MetroFlex riders, learning more about demographics of our ridership and main trip purposes, how and why people are using the service. And we are still kind of working through those results. We got over 1,000 responses, which we thought was pretty great. And we are working through breaking those down by service area and where riders, which service area riders use most. So we are asking those questions.
Okay, thank you very much.
Is that it for your questions? Okay, Councilmember Jing?
Okay, I also have a few. I'm curious, what's the average or median length of a MetroFlex ride in Issaquah? Do you know, in terms of time or miles or whatever?
I don't know off the top of my head in Issaquah, so I can get back to you with that. But I know over program wide, our rides are about 3 miles.
Okay, thank you. And then in Issaquah, so I saw, we have the 2 rides per van hour. I'm curious what percentage of the time the vans are, doing a ride or driving to a ride versus like being idle?
The way that the back-end algorithm works for MetroFlex, there's very little idle time because of the demand we see in Issaquah and Sammamish for MetroFlex. So I don't have the exact amount of time that vans are just kind of idly sitting, but if they are for too long, they'll be pulled to a different service area for MetroFlex to be in use. So we don't have a ton of downtime. We're kind of using the vans to their highest capacity right now.
Okay, that makes sense, because I guess kind of the idea that I had in my head was that there were 4 that were, like assigned to our area and would stay in our area, but, just based on demand, they could be reallocated to different MetroFlex areas.
Correct.
Okay, that makes sense. One other question I had was, what percentage of these rides serve people with disabilities? Do you have data on that?
We do have data in terms of like wheelchair accessible van usage, because we do have wheelchair accessible MetroFlex vans. I don't know off the top of my head what percentage of those rides are.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I just thought of these while we were talking. I should have given them earlier, but that's all good.
Okay, Councilmember Zhou?
Thank you for the presentation tonight. Andrew, if you would move to page 7 of 13, the pickup location map. Just had a question about it. And I'll just keep talking really slow as soon as the map gets pulled up. So the map does show up pickup locations, top pickup locations in the area for the Issaquah area, Transit Center, High School, Issaquah Commons, and Rosecrest Apartments in Tallis. I was wondering if we had a map of where people were being dropped off. Now, I'll just say that I often get picked up when my car is in the shop. It was in the shop 3 times in about 3 weeks, and I use the Metro service to get up to Squawk rather than walking the 2 miles there. So I'll go ahead and let you answer and see what we come up with.
We do. I'm sorry. It was sent out right before this meeting over email in response to another council question. So you should be able to have it in email. I can't pull it up on my slides this evening, but perhaps the clerk has access to it.
I do see it in my map, and I noticed that it was quite dispersed in terms of where people are getting dropped off. It seems that it's everywhere in the city. And what do you, as an administrator and maybe our Metro folks, what do you see that or interpret that as telling us?
Good question. What my theory would be is that, for example, if we look at the pickup locations, like the transit center, for example, then they're taking it to be dropped off back at home, or Issaquah High School, then they're going home. So that's how I would interpret that, is that they're not always 2-way trips necessarily. There's some other carpooling or some other way that they're getting around, and then only one part. So they're using, it's not a symmetrical service.
Okay. Let me throw a theory out that maybe the pickup locations are in the central locations that we would kind of expect, but the drop-off locations are kind of everywhere around the city, kind of indicating, to me at least, and maybe you could comment on it, that people are using it for all sorts of reasons, whether it's the reasons that our high school kids use it for, but I'm using it to get from the car shop back home, and so that people are going just all over the city and using it for a wide range of reasons, and not just for perhaps what we might have in our mind as what the service is being used for. And I'd like to hear if you have any comments on that.
I think that's a reasonable conclusion. I recall when we did a lot of surveying, this might be 2019, when we were looking at the future of the Route 200 and looking at other options and alternatives. We did a lot of survey work with folks who were using the Route 200, folks who were just residents, and also people We targeted the food bank, senior center, other places like that. And what we heard from people who wanted to have this type of transit service is that they wanted to use it to go to doctor's appointments, they wanted to use it to go grocery shopping. And so I think that people are using it in all kinds of ways.
Thank you very much.
Deputy Council President DiMichele.
Thank you. So, and correct me if I'm wrong, is the map just Issaquah, or is it the Issaquah-Sammamish?
Well, so you'll see that part of the service area, it's kind of, I think it's highlighted in pink, that service area does extend into Sammamish. And so before Issaquah started subsidizing the service and expanding the service area more into Issaquah, there was a little bit of that Sammamish service area that came into Issaquah, really to the Issaquah Highlands Park and Ride in that area. So we do have an overlapping service area with Sammamish at this point. Because of the city's subsidy, it covers much more of the city of Issaquah.
Okay. And so have we tracked how many people go back and forth to Sammamish, and how many people from Sammamish come to Issaquah, or not?
I don't believe we have tracked that specifically, but I'm going to refer to Metro staff if we have.
Not the most satisfying answer here. We can track that, but I don't have the numbers right here for you. But we can see the percentage of trips that start in Sammamish and end in Issaquah, or start in Issaquah and end in Sammamish. When we are talking about Issaquah ridership, though, it's the start points. That's the ridership we're talking about. It has to start in Issaquah to count as an Issaquah ride.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Ray.
Thanks. I am kind of listening to Councilmember Zhang and J&J. Yeah, it is. And I have, it sparked a question about not so much idle time, but deadhead time, going from one drop-off to the next pickup. Do we have any data on what that looks like in terms of how much time, how many miles, what percentage of their time is moving between drop-offs and the next pickup?
That is something I don't know if we track. I wouldn't be surprised if we do, but I haven't seen those numbers before in terms of just.
Any kind of just rough estimate of what it might be? 10% of the time, 20% of the time, 100% of the time?
Honestly, don't know if I
Okay.
can give you an estimate. I'm sorry.
That'd be great.
Councilmember Cho.
If Councilmember Ray would allow me to give kind of a experience answer, I can let him know what I've seen when I request the MetroFlex. In both of my experiences, the MetroFlex was already up in the Highlands area, and my wait time was about 20 to 23 minutes. During that time, the MetroFlex picked up and dropped off at least 3 other people before getting to me during that time. So the way the route is set up, or the way the drivers are instructed, is they pick up a person, they take it to the next location, drop off that person, unless there is an overlapping kind of situation where 2 routes kind of run the same. And then, so there were about 4 stops before they came and picked me up. There was another occasion where I got picked up at my apartment, and there was another person in the van. We were going the same direction. I got off at my stop before he got off, and he continued on his journey. So there's some overlap there, and dead time is not necessarily a measure in a sense, because it looks like to me that there's always someone either being carried or they're going quickly to that next person. So maybe it's that dead time after a stop, between stops, it might be there, but it seemed to be pretty efficient in terms of the circular route that it was taking to get to me and to pick me up, was my experience.
Councilmember Ray, I would also offer perhaps as a proxy would be the wait time that that riders would experience, since we don't have data and you're looking for a ballpark estimate. Average wait time from Hale to the ride coming is, I think, in that range that Councilmember Joe suggested, 20 to 23 minutes. It was in a previous slide.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. But then if I want to use another proxy, I look at the number of trips per hour, and then I factor in an average trip length of 3 miles. So let's say traffic is really bad. So maybe that's 10 minutes. So I got 40 minutes I'm trying to account for. So just trying to understand the utilization. It's a 100% utilization question.
Any other questions? Okay, I will ask mine. So in the email that you sent out about drop-off locations, you also provided a table showing the unique riders in 2024 and 2025. So there was 908 unique riders in 2024 and 742 in 2025 so far. Do we have any sense of how that compares to other ridership areas? I'm trying to understand, is this being utilized by fewer people more frequently, or more people less frequently, and how that relates to our potential for growth?
I don't have that information today, and I don't think that our partners at Metro do either. Is that information that we can try to provide? Okay.
Okay. And then the drop-off location map that you provided also had a, not table of contents, like an index that said what the colors meant, which suggested that the locations of like the transit centers were seeing 300 to 400, and I assume that's number of visits off of that. I would also be interested to understand how that compares and whether or not that is the same. What is the word I'm thinking of? The table off of, no, like the table that you see on a map that indicates legend. Thank you. If that's the same legend as the one in our PowerPoint. So the PowerPoint.
If the colors mean the same numbers.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we might have to just verify.
Yep.
Okay.
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 Great. Next question. Through this evaluation process, did this go through the Transportation Advisory Board? And if not, when was the last time they discussed MetroFlex?
The last time they discussed MetroFlex, the last time that the Transportation Advisory Board provided recommendations on MetroFlex was in, I believe, 2021. I'm just thinking back to that timeline. So we have not gone back to TAB to talk about performance necessarily. We have not come to them with a policy question on MetroFlex services.
Great. That's a good question then. With this contract, is there a possibility of adjusting our boundary lines? For example, dropping areas that have less usage and adding areas that maybe like the Issaquah Highlands that have increased density that could provide more rides per hour?
That is a possibility to change the service area. If we were to add to the service area without subtracting from the service area, that would probably require us to get another van and therefore increase the cost of the service.
Yeah.
And so we have to, we talked about options within, how much we could change that service area. Could we reduce the service area and reduce the cost to the city, for example? But at this point, the service area is what it is for really one van to operate. So if we were to add, we would need to subtract from a different part of the service area.
Okay. Great. Okay, checking in. Another question, Councilmember Ray.
Thanks. What's our drop dead date on making a decision on this?
The contract expires December 31st, so we need to make a decision before then.
So no lead time, no time before notification on terminating the contract or not renewing the contract?
We can let the contract expire. I don't think we don't need to notify Metro, 90 days before expiration. It can just expire.
Okay.
Okay, good set of questions. Next part of all of this is looking to public comment, seeing if there are any additional public comments. Obviously we heard from folks at the beginning, but now you've got more additional information. So if there's anything that you would like to express, anyone want to make any additional public comment? No? Kaylee, come on up.
Okay, just a couple things. I just wanted to, again, go back to some of the slides that we were presented. Issaquah was 2.1, while the 4 above that was 2.3, 2.4. We're not out of the scope of service, so I think that's important to keep in mind. Also, I want to go back to Councilmember Ray. And you were talking about the dead time, and if we're thinking about, it's not 40 minutes, right? It's 2 rides, so that's 40 minutes of rides, 20 minutes of dead time. And that's if we're not picking up more people. So, and then I would be remiss if I didn't say one more time that this isn't just about what's the best utilization of a service. I think it's really important for us, especially right now, to be thinking about our most marginalized people and how we support them and provide services to them. And so I think this is something that it needs to be equitable, and MetroFlex is equitable.
Thank you. And it sounds like we have a member online who would like to make a comment.
Yes. Ken Eastman is with us. And Ken, I've just made you a panelist, and you should be able to unmute and can choose to turn your video on.
Okay, I think I've pushed the correct buttons.
You have. Thanks, Ken.
Ken Eastman, I'm a resident of Issaquah, 2473 Northwest Stony Creek Drive. And thanks for the presentation. I've looked at the MetroFlex usage data that was in the presentation, and I think MetroFlex is an interesting idea, but it just doesn't seem to pencil out. The taxpayer subsidy, is way out of line with the benefit, $40.71. And let's all remember, if you live in Issaquah, you're not only an Issaquah taxpayer, you're also a King County taxpayer. So that whole $40 sooner or later comes through to each resident in Issaquah. The city is looking for additional funding. There's talk about raising the sales tax to fund public safety, which is important. We got MetroFlex funds and a program that just doesn't seem to be working in terms of the benefits. And we shouldn't forget that low-income people are also being taxed in order to pay for MetroFlex. I mean, they pay taxes, they pay sales taxes. We should remember they're funding it as well if we're concerned about that. So let's talk about idle time. 2.1 trips, approximately 3 miles. When you got to believe that there is idle time there. Single ridership is troubling, 45%. It's been a fair amount of time for this pilot. It's been 6 quarters. I just don't think it's likely that the readership is going to change very much. And quite frankly, it does strike me that in a lot of cases, this is just a taxpayer subsidized Uber for affluent people. I mean, 75% are EPAs, which is very different than some of the other MetroFlex areas that have higher ridership. I don't think it's unreasonable to walk from the high school to the garage. You know, the kids should be able to do that. I don't think that's much of a stretch. And even walking to shopping shouldn't be that much of a stretch. And, you know, if it's high school kids that are too cool to take the yellow school bus, you know, that's not something that I think the taxpayers should subsidize either. You know, I would just comment, if this MetroFlex program is truly dynamically moving the vans around to other service areas, then we should have a cost in Issaquah that reflects that, and it doesn't seem to do that. So I'm a little bit reluctant to believe that there's all that much efficiency there. I just end this by saying the city council's got the responsibility, you know, to the residents to be fiscally responsible. It's admirable that we piloted this MetroFlex, but our city leaders need to have the courage to cancel a program that just doesn't make sense. I mean, we've all heard that term, tax and spend politicians. I think you need to ask yourself, do you want to be remembered as having the courage to cancel a project that was admirable, but it just didn't pencil out? Or do you want to have the reputation of just being tax and spend politicians that chase bright and shiny objects that just don't make sense? Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Ken. Do we have anyone else online indicating a desire to speak? Okay. Well, we appreciate the public comments on those areas. Let me get back to my agenda. So, council direction on this. The administration does not recommend continuing this program. They have asked for our feedback, particularly as we are looking at the 2026 mid-biennium budget portions, and then also potential to extend this contract into 2027. Anyone want to start out? Councilmember Jang.
I'll just start by saying I really don't appreciate how this was brought to us, you know, kind of 3 months before the end of the contract. We knew that this cliff was coming up when we passed the budget a year ago. And so we could have spent this time thinking about, you know, okay, if our budget for these types of transportation solutions is $200,000, what could we do with that $200,000 if not MetroFlex? So I think if the question being, do we do MetroFlex or not, I think the question is, what types of alternative transportation options could we come up with in $200,000? And maybe MetroFlex is more than that, so we need to find other options. I really agree with Kaylee's points on, you know, funding for equitable transportation options. I do think, especially, you know, for an organization like the Garage, potentially having even like more targeted types of things where it's like, okay, you know, for those folks, maybe part of the cost of providing services is actually, you know, having funding for, you know, cab rides for kids that really need it to access the services, because I feel like that, you know, is somewhat more targeted. Also, you know, with Rosecrest up in Tallis, that one to me is also like, just fundamentally, it's kind of a land use issue where we chose to put affordable housing far away from transit 20 years ago, and now we're kind of, you know, reaping the consequences of that. So I think there's other options. You know, there's other equitable transportation solutions that actually have grant funding. For example, I would just talk with the sustainability team like a couple weeks ago about a grant from WashDOT to set up like an e-bike lending library run by community organizations. That could be a really good fit for something like Rosecrest and Tallis, where presumably some of those folks are literally just, you know, going to shop at Target or whatever the case may be, and, you know, for a 2-mile trip, it's great for an e-bike. You can get back up the hill, no problem. And so just, like, I think I would really like to see us be a bit more creative with how we can actually spend this money to, you know, because we do have $200,000 budgeted. And so, you know, how can we, like, what are some of the different options, and calling together some of the first and last mile issues? Because ultimately, you know, from a climate perspective, in terms of climate emissions, it's like we have to reduce vehicle miles traveled, right? So it's like and so obviously the best thing to do is to get people out of cars, you know, for transit going from point A to point B, like going from Issaquah to Seattle or something like that, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think for shorter trips, making it so that people don't have to get in any kind of vehicle is obviously ideal. And obviously, you know, coming up on winter, that makes it more difficult. But I just feel like we really do need to have a, you know, kind of broader view of what the solutions are to first mile, last mile service, instead of just being like, oh, you know, this is either yes or no, and then if it's no, we have nothing else. Even though we still have this $200,000 in the budget that is then not going to be doing anything, instead of spending it on something that might, you know, have a better, potentially better cost benefit. I will say also, I mean, you know, in terms of the cost per ride, I went and checked out, you know, because I live up in Tallis, so kind of at the edge of the service area. It's like, oh, if I wanted to go to Sammamish, how much would it cost for me to take an Uber? And it was like $30. So I think if we're really, you know, if we want to do a better, like, cost-effective, equitable transportation thing, I really think maybe we should be, you know, funding the garage and giving them a grant to, you know, have their students use that service. But I think I don't, again, you know, I don't appreciate that it's kind of like a binary yes, no, when there should be various different other options that we're looking at.
Okay, anybody wants to go next? Councilmember Ray.
Very much like to go next. And I'd like to say that I agree with Councilmember Jang extensively, but I was thinking about a couple things, like what are the policy objectives of MetroFlex? And I came up with 3 that I've heard about tonight. One is reduce traffic congestion / climate impact. The other is last mile for transit. And then the third is equitable transportation options. So when I look at traffic congestion / climate impact, I'm not convinced yet, and I don't have any data to suggest yet, that we really have reduced traffic or had a positive impact on carbon emissions. So that makes me scratch my head a little bit and say before continuing this, I would like to have more definitive data that says, yeah, this really does reduce traffic congestion and does reduce carbon emissions. Second is last mile to transit. Hooray for Tallis. I think we've got data that suggests that Tallis has been fairly effective in using it for transit. I can extrapolate that from pickups and drop-offs, but it's less so for Squawk. We get a passing grade, but not a stellar grade there. And then the equitable transportation options, I keep coming back to, is there a more cost-effective way to deliver more targeted services to those marginalized populations that we want to serve? And I'm struck with a model that a number of large businesses use for providing transportation to their employees at very specific times. So, for instance, Microsoft has a bus that starts the day maybe out in Fremont and picks up people along the way and then delivers them to the campus at a specific time because there's an arrival time and a departure time. And the similar thing at the end of the day, that everybody from the campus hops on the bus and it takes them back the other way. So there may be some options where we can look at doing not necessarily a generic connector, but maybe a very targeted program where we can deliver services to some of the communities that we think would benefit from those. But I think that the biggest problem with MetroFlex is really not necessarily that it doesn't do good, because I think it does. It's just, it's really cost effective. Is it really cost effective? And as we look at the budgets in the next couple of years, we've got some tough, you have some tough trade-offs to make. And so if we do this and we spend this $500,000 on MetroFlex over the next biennium, what are you not going to do? And I think that that's a lens that we need to look at the MetroFlex through. That's all I got.
Deputy Council President DiMichele.
Thank you. So thank you to my fellow council members for their comments. I'm really torn about this because we're talking a big amount of money, and we all know that we're facing some real challenges for our budget. The first year, the $57,000 or $58,000, we could, probably find somewhere. But it's the second year, and we're required to sign a 2-year contract, and $60,000 or $70,000 is the equivalent of probably two positions in the city. And so we're likely that we would lose some people if we chose to go ahead. So we have to weigh that against the equity issues that have been raised, and I think the people who have raised those equity issues. If we just look at 3,000 rides or passenger rides, that equals about 800 people from equity priority areas who are taking MetroFlex and may not have an option. And I'd like to make a little bit of clarity about the comments about equity priority areas. Those are defined areas on the map. You can live outside of an equity priority area and still be low income, still be disabled, still be a teen. So that 25% number is a little bit, we have to be cautious about how we use it. We could have a much higher number of low-income people who are using MetroFlex. They just don't happen to live in an equity priority area. So let's be careful with that 25% number. What bothers me about canceling MetroFlex is that we really don't have any viable options to replace it. And I really want to thank Andrea for responding to my questions about other possible options. And when you look at each one, they really don't meet the policy goals that we were hoping to meet with MetroFlex. We talked about, I asked about Lyft and Uber, which we looked at before. There is a program at Metro Community Van that possibly could serve targeted populations. The problem with community vans is you have to find someone, a volunteer in the community who's willing to be the driver, and there's liability issues around that and so forth. Also, just finding someone who's qualified. And then running our own shuttle like Bellhop in Bellevue or some other things are enormously expensive and probably more expensive than what we are proposing to pay for MetroFlex. So again, I agree. It does bother me that if we cancel this, we are leaving a number of people who are reliant on MetroFlex without really any other viable option. So yeah, I'm torn. And I think that Kaylee Jake made a very good point when she said that equity, this is not equal, but this is equity. And so I guess I am leaning towards, let's try to find a way to keep MetroFlex going. I'd like to know what we're going to have to give up. If we can start to define that, what would that $275,000, where would we be taking that away in the budget, and what would we lose because of that? And maybe we can better weigh what we're planning to do if we have more of that information, or if we start discussing our budget issues now. What does the council want to remove for that $280,000? So right now, I am persuaded by the equity issues and also the issues that were raised by Ann Fletcher in terms of our commitment to the Climate Action Plan. So thank you.
Yep, Councilmember Hall?
Sure, thank you. Well, first, I've always liked the MetroFlex program a handful of times to get to the transit center, and it's been really helpful, especially where I live. And although we are kind of a lower performing service area, I think 2,600 to 3,400 rides a quarter isn't nothing. I mean, that's a good amount of rides, but I also think $250,000 a year isn't nothing either. So I agree with you, Deputy Council President. I'm torn as well. I agree that the need is clear, but I think I lean toward renewing the contract, but I'm not without concern. So there are a couple ways that I've been thinking about this I wanted to just go through. So going back to kind of what problem are we trying to solve, it seems like that question has evolved a little bit over time. It started as this last mile problem, especially for our neighborhoods in the hills, in Squawk and Tallis, but it's also made sense over time to kind of tie in some of this data related to our climate goals, reducing single occupancy vehicle trips, these equity priority access areas. Access to the garage has been brought up to us many times from a variety of public commenters over the years. And so I think for the price tag here, we just need to be really clear about this, about what problem exactly are we trying to solve, so we know what success looks like in the long term. So, and because being clear might also help us pull out and identify what those kind of alternatives, more targeted solutions over time might be. So I think kind of policy process is important here. And then also I think for the price tag, it's pretty difficult to sustain, not impossible, but certainly difficult, as has been alluded to. I'm really worried about heading into the next biennial budget, and it makes me think, more generally, what could we do potentially more of with $500,000 a biennium within some of our other priority policy areas as a council? And it's just really hard to answer that question outside of the budget process. So we're kind of entering a little bit of the unknown here, right? So again, I lean towards renewing the contract because of some of the points that have been brought up tonight, especially around equity. And equity does require leadership, and leadership sometimes requires putting your money where your mouth is there. So, but I would like to see a version of this in the mid-buy. I don't know if it would be impossible to see multiple versions of the mid-buy with it or without it, so we can kind of, or maybe it's even just more of a discussion that council needs to have about other potential priorities weighing against what success would look like in $500,000 spent this way. So that, but also just us as a council better defining what it is we're trying to achieve here, what are the problems that we're trying to solve, what does achievable success look like to tell us that the money that we're spending is having the desired outcome that we wanted it to, and then just be specific about those. So, and it sounds like we have some open questions too that Metro is going to get back to us on. So I would hope we would have a kind of a forum for council to get in the weeds and kind of be able to define that clearly. I don't know if that's best during the mid-buy or if it's best to kind of take half an hour right now and kind of get into the weeds there, but that's what I'm hoping for, and thanks for all the work.
Councilmember Joe.
No, thank you. Great discussion tonight. It's difficult to kind of visualize what the decision is. I think as Deputy Council President Michelle pointed out, and as Councilmember Hall pointed out, if we do spend $50,000 this year, the $200,000 plus in the next year, and renew the contract for that 2-year period, what are we forgoing? What is it really going to be 2 FTEs in Public Works that we're going to not have available to us? And I'm not asking the administration to give us specific examples, but perhaps just an order of magnitude, if we fund this program and choose to do it out to the program, to the contracts, and what are some of the things that we might not be able to do? And that could be, we won't be able to do this particular road project, for example, or we wouldn't be able to have these 2 people in parks, we wouldn't be able to acquire this kind of land, just to give us a context of what the decision means for us in terms of things that we would not be able to do and serve our city through making this decision. I've been on the rec lawn out in front of the community center, and I've watched the kids walk down from the high school and go to the garage and start taking part in the programs. And as Executive Director for the garage, Kaylee Jess points out that many of the students are doing counseling. They're doing the programming that's there to help benefit their mental health and their social health as well. And then the MetroFlex gives them the opportunity to still go home in the evening or go to work if they have an after-school job. The school bus, the activity school bus, leaves the high school usually before some of these programs are done or before the students from the garage will be able to do their program and then walk back up to the garage. If you have a student that's in an after-school production, like a play or a musical, and they don't drive, you're picking them up at anywhere between 6 and 10 at night. And the the MetroFlex certainly is a good option for students that may not be able to get a ride. From an equity point of view, I think we touched on the fact that a number of the pickups and the trips are from the affordable housing area in Tallis. That's certainly one element to consider. I also, as a person that is getting up in years, would see myself using it to go to medical appointments. And I think that if you look at the maps, you see that there are a number of drop-offs, or a pretty intense number of drop-offs at the hospital. And I think if we mapped out all the medical offices that are generally there, there would be a correlation, I think, between some of the more intense use of this service. So thinking about our elderly population and how we're making sure that they stay healthy. We talk about, in our transitory development project off of 900, the need to have medical services right there, right near the affordable housing if we can, right on the first floor. But if we can't do that, I see this as an alternative that allows people to still get to those medical appointments without having a car, and if they're a little bit slow in their movement, it can be very helpful too. I recently had a bout of gout, and my left toe was hurting to the point where it was very difficult to walk, and I became very aware of ramps and elevators and electric doors and finding routes that I could get to the doctor, and I was very thankful that the ramps were there and they weren't steep. And those of us that are having mobility challenges, getting around, I think have a different view of the world at times. And having something like MetroFlex available can be the difference between going and getting that medical attention, and then the alternative is to just tough it out, so to speak, and live with the pain. And that's not a really good alternative for the health of our community. Those are some of the comments that have been going through my mind as I've been considering this. Like Councilmember Hall, I'm leaning toward evaluating this carefully and potentially trying to find a way to continue the program, but I'm still open to more information and additional presentations that the administration and others might come forward with. Thank you.
Great. I think I will make some comments. Andrea, before I make comments, just a question. If I remember correctly, when we were talking about this during the previous budget cycle, there was an out option for the 2-year contract. It was a rather large notification period. Do we know what that is?
I don't off the top of my head. I'm not sure if our partners do.
Hi, Amanda Pleasant Brown. I'm shorter than you. I do government relations for Metro, and so we will follow up with certainty, but I believe it's 6 months, 180 days.
Fantastic. Okay. One of the reasons I ask about that is because as we are looking at this evaluation, not just for the 2026 period, but also as a 2-year contract, there is more uncertainty for us on what our budget looks like in 2027. But given a 6-month period of time, I think that gives us a little bit more time to do an evaluation. And so one of the things I would like to do as we look at this is figure out what are our goals and our criteria for this, because we haven't so far really taken that and figured out what is working, what isn't working. Because I think what I've heard from council is a variety of things of, hey, equity is really important to us, and having a set of transportation options that understand the needs of some of our underserved communities, some of our members who are either disabled, unable to drive, too young, older that cannot drive, those are populations that I think we see using this service and using this service in a way that there aren't many other options. So that would be one thing I would keep in mind. I think the other thing that we've looked at with this is, hey, maybe this is a little bit expensive per ride. And so I think that's a great piece of feedback for us, but it's not an end point. That's just us saying, okay, maybe this is a little expensive. I will note the $40 per ride is the whole cost, but in the memo, it said our cost as a city was $20.31. And from my perspective, that's actually a fairly effective cost to providing something that gives equity service. The other thing I would look at is if we're talking about 2,600 to 3,000 rides per quarter, that's 11,000 rides per year that we are able to provide out of our budget and going to these areas. That doesn't even count the number of rides that are coming from Sammamish into Issaquah to use some of our very nicely placed businesses that provide us with property and sales tax. So I think there are other benefits to this service that don't come out in the wash of just cost per ride. So what I would like to suggest is I would love to hear if we can take a look at our boundaries, because I think we do have some areas that aren't being as utilized, and we have other areas, again, I will say as an advocate from the Highlands, the Highlands has some of our largest percentage of affordable housing units, and one of the things we've heard from many folks that are up farther on the hill is that they feel very stranded up there. And so I would like to take a look at maybe taking out some of the areas of Squawk that we have evidence from this pilot aren't as highly utilized, and add in areas of the Highlands. Even if you can't get it all the way up to the top, if you could get it closer to Central Park and the elementary school area, I think that could provide a really good additional service area that could provide a high set of usage by people that frankly need this. So one, I would like to look at changing our boundaries, and while we wouldn't be able to in this time period calculate how that might reduce our cost per ride, I think that's something that then we could evaluate within this time frame and utilize that to really have a data-based analysis and also a goals-based analysis. I think it would also allow us to take this back to the Transportation Advisory Board and get them the ability to evaluate based on criteria that we are able to set. And then when we're talking about the budget portion, I think the feedback that I would have on this is right now, because we currently have this in our budget, we wouldn't be looking at $250,000 per year of cuts in the next budget. It's just a lack of $250,000 of increases if we add this on. Because if we consider this an established base of service, we're not saying by adding this or by continuing this, we have to cut 2 employees. That was the decision we had to make previously. Right now, to continue our service levels here, both within city employees and within the MetroFlex program, there wouldn't be additional trade-offs. The trade-offs would be, what else could we not do? And I think that's a very important evaluation point, but typically when we do that within our 2-year budget cycle, not at this point in 2026 in our mid-biennium. So my feedback on budget is, hey, absolutely, let's take a look at this, but I think there's some things that we can do in the meantime to adjust this program, maybe to take more of those signs and put them out in front of other service areas that people might utilize this a little bit more, and see if we can get that ridership up a little bit, and also evaluate some of our goals. And then if we're going to be evaluating that in a future time, I would love to look at alternatives like e-bike subsidies. I think that could be a really good opportunity. I just, at this point, without a viable alternative and a way to evaluate a viable alternative, I see this as a strong program that provides a lot of benefits to our community and a lot of equitable benefits that I don't feel comfortable at all canceling on this concept, especially when we could look at this and do a 6-month out at a future time. So my feedback would be continue with modifications and create a robust way to evaluate this in the future based on our goals. So now that we have heard from everybody, I would love to go back and get another sense from folks, because it seems like we're fairly divided, / maybe we don't have effective feedback for your budget evaluations. Anything you want to ask us before we go back through another round?
Thank you. So Mayor Pauley, this recommendation is really coming from her. She's very concerned about the cost. She's very concerned about future issues. And so, one of the things we're staring down is the 2026 budget. And so at the very least, there would be $50,000 of reductions in 2026 that would have to happen. So if the council is agreeable to that, coming up with what you think those reductions are, certainly Mayor Pauley will, I'm sure, watch the tape if she's not otherwise watching this evening, and will make recommendations of what would be cut from the 26 budget. And so then if the council agrees to that and we do a 2-year budget, it sounds like the council's saying that, you would definitely want that 6-month out. And so then it's been 6 months to review that. We currently have no staff to do that. And so we would also have to put in the budget next year, in addition to the $50,000, some increment of dollars to do all of the work that you all have described this evening. Because currently, again, we had a staff member, that staff member position was eliminated in order to balance the current biennium budget. So we would come back, I would guess then, with not only $50,000 in 26, but also some increment. I'm not sure how much John Larson Friend's position was, 150, 175, fully loaded. So let's say we needed 6 months of that, so that maybe is an additional $100,000. So that's a $150,000 ask in order to continue this forward. So if that's kind of what the council's thinking, then that's a $150,000 reduction in 26 in order to keep this moving. So if that's what you're thinking, we could take that and come back to you as part of the mid-biennium budget with a $150,000 reduction on top of anything else that might come up. The council's looking at public safety sales tax, and so certainly that is helpful on the public safety side. So the reductions would be coming from Public Works, Parks, Recreation, Community Services, the planning, additional work that you were looking to do, I think was about $150,000 of additional planning contracts to do some of the whiteboard Title 18 things. And so that would all go into that mix. So if that's what you'd like to do, otherwise, I'm looking at the calendar. If you want to have an additional discussion about this, we can try to either have a special committee of the whole to have a further discussion about this, or try to put it on some additional items, or you can send it to committee and either have one of your committees. This is probably Transportation Infrastructure Council Committee, and so I haven't looked at their agendas, but perhaps this could be added to a meeting in October for them. So those are some options. Happy to
Great.
Whatever feedback you need.
So it sounds like just maybe a little bit more focus on what our budget, what the information we would need, how we would approach budget, things like that. I, for one, certainly have heard from the community that traffic is a big problem, and so I would not have a problem with advocating for an additional staff member focused on transportation. So, Councilmember Jang.
Just on the funding question, are we able to use the Transportation Benefit District sales tax to fund MetroFlex or other those types of programs?
Those funds are already allocated to one very large capital project, and so if the council wished to look at that, we probably could make some adjustments there.
It is eligible, so council could choose to spend the TBD revenues on MetroFlex. That's an eligible expense, but as City Administrator Bobkowitz said, we would have to, those revenues are already budgeted for use in 26 certainly, and even beyond, per the council conversations that we've had and the direction we've received from council, so we'd have to rethink that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm curious, like, what are the payment terms for the MetroFlex contract? So is it like annual or is it quarterly? Because in theory, I'm thinking, with a $200,000 budget, if we budget for like 3 quarters, and that would potentially give us enough time to kind of think through, what some of the other options are, knowing that, given the 180-day cancellation period, we would actually have to figure something out by the end of Q1. But yeah.
I believe we pay on a quarterly basis.
Great, thank you.
Anyone else? Councilmember Hall?
Yeah, just to ask a question. I don't know if it's clear to me what this potential new position would do or what they would be needed for.
We have no staff to do any of the work you've described this evening, so
Yeah,
we just
what-
need to
what
find,
work?
looking at other options moving forward. The council has listed a variety of things. If you wanted to fund this in a different way or do a different kind
So
of
like
service.
the table, Andrea, you were showing us, like going back, kind of refreshing that, looking at what are the other options on the table, that would be the scope of work that we would probably need an FTE for, is what you're saying?
Yes, so anything outside of the MetroFlex contract, that would require a lot more staff work. So we've heard ideas tonight from council, like providing targeted subsidies to specific segments of the community or specific nonprofits that serve segments of the community. That type of work to explore that program, what that could look like, facilitate the conversation with Transportation Advisory Board and council, that would require additional staff. Looking at other options with Uber and Lyft and reigniting those conversations that the administration had with them back in 2021, that would require another staff. So, or certainly additional staff support than what we currently have.
And so it may also be eliminating other projects that we're working on. So it may not be, and we'd have to go back and discuss this with Mayor Pauley and to see if there were projects that she would recommend to the city council that we stop doing in order to pick this up.
Okay, thank you. I'm still chewing.
Andrea, can you remind me what the project is that the Transportation Benefit District is funding?
The Transportation Benefit District, primarily, those revenues are used for 2 things. One is the Northwest Sammamish non-motorized project, as well as ITS, or Intelligent Transportation Systems.
Okay, and looking at the budget, we bring in $2.2 million per year off of that, but we only have 1.4 and 1.1 million of expenditures each of the 2 years of this budget.
That's correct, because we were setting aside some of those funds for the Northwest Sammamish non-motorized project.
Okay, so it sounds like that could be an option as we evaluate. Deputy Council President DeMichelle.
So one thing I've heard from more than one person is how aggressively are we promoting MetroFlex? And since we have Metro experts here, I think it's a good time to ask this question. Were we to renew this contract, what would be the commitment from Metro in terms of promoting communications, advertising, and those sorts of things? Is that part of the contract that we sign, or is that a service that Metro just provides?
Thanks for that question, Deputy Council President. So marketing is a part of the regular work of Metro, and certainly we worked closely with John Larson Friend. He's actually still on our billboards. And I would have to go back and look at, to to look at the actual contract language, but I will say from a mobility agency, we have an interest in ensuring that people know that there's accessible services that they can use. So I'm happy to take that back to leadership and see how much we could actually infuse into it. We've helped market other services. We're facing our own budgetary challenges, but we're certainly able to do it. And then we also have a team who can come out and do individualized education as well. So we have some additional services to ensure that people know what services exist and then how to use them. So if there is a nonprofit and they want to learn how their residents can use it, whether that be seniors, whether that be youth, we're happy to utilize those services as well. But I can follow up specifically to see if we would be willing to infuse some additional dollars into marketing.
Thank you so much.
Okay, more questions as we're kind of processing through all of this information, it sounds like. So, any other feedback on how we kind of approach this, anything we would need for decision-making ahead of budget cycle, et cetera? From my perspective, I think the Transportation Benefit District is a really interesting point because right now the timeline for that Northwest Sammamish Road non-motorized project is, more extended than we had initially thought because of WashDOT's culvert stuff. And so trying to understand how that taking a portion of that funding during this time to utilize for that would be what the impact would be over the timeline. That would be really important from my perspective. Is there other information or ways you're thinking about this? Yeah, Councilmember Hall?
Well, I'll just briefly say, even considering use of TBD sales tax dollars really concerns me for the Northwest Sammamish Road project. I imagine we're saving some of that to help pay debt service on councilmanic bonds in the future too, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, so putting that project in jeopardy is a huge red flag for me. So definitely would like an answer to that question as well. I think we need more time to dig into this as a council too. And I was going to suggest, I wonder if council leadership could kind of pull questions from our comments at tonight's meeting. Maybe we could have another, if mobility and infrastructure is the right place for it, that's fine. I would love to be able to have this at another committee of the whole if we have time for doing that before. Maybe I'll ask this, when does the mid-buy discussion start? Is that the next committee of the whole? I guess I could pull up the planning calendar myself.
So you have a committee of the whole currently scheduled for October 13th, 2 items, mid-biennium budget, the first discussion, and then also a presentation about another top council priority, which is funding north-south transportation improvements.
So that's already going to be a long committee of the whole meeting, I would imagine. I don't know, I guess that's kind of where my brain sits, is we need some more time as a council to dig into this, including goals and objectives, as was talked about, including trade-offs with costs as we head into the budget. And it's not all just about like, what would we have to find cost savings for, but also, like Council President Walsh was saying earlier, like the opportunity cost, like of this funding too, that we could potentially put the full $500,000 towards something else that could potentially have a more measurable impact, however we're defining success. So that's a long conversation. So my only thought is I think we need some more time in a different venue to talk about this.
So just a thought to council. It sounds like there's definitely a kind of discussion point around, how effective of a program, what are our goals, how are we utilizing our money, et cetera. Perhaps this is a council retreat potential topic, and toward that idea, you know, I guess the place that I am sitting is because the administration has not presented viable alternatives, has not kind of come at this with, okay, we think this is a problem and how you solve it, I'm hesitant to break off from a contract that we have that is being utilized for 11,000 rides per year, without evaluating kind of where our values are and where we would go with this, especially given we can just do a 6-month outage on something like this. Because if we were being given the information or kind of evaluating other ways that we might utilize our budget, I think that's a very valid conversation to have. Right now, we have a lack of information in one area, and we have a set of utilization in the other, and so we're kind of evaluating a somewhat known against a question mark. And I think that's a difficult position to put us in. So maybe I'll go back to City Administrator Bobkowitz. When we are looking at this upcoming budget adjustment, at a minimum, to keep this service going, what we need to provide is the like 58,000 from a budget standpoint.
I mean, certainly that's part of it. And again, the mayor enters into the contract. You know, the mayor is not, at this point, willing to do that. So I think the way this would work is if the council puts the money in the budget, and then the contract comes to the council with a recommendation not to enter into it, and the council approves it anyway, without a city attorney here, just my able friend Andrea, I think that's how this would play out. So if the council as the legislative body adopts the budget, the council as the policymaking body approves a contract. And so,
I'm sorry, are you suggesting that the mayor would choose not to sign a contract that the council has
oh, no.
expressed interest and budgeted for?
No, but again, it would have to come to the council with a negative recommendation. And so the council would have to authorize the mayor to execute a contract that she's recommending not to do. Something we don't see very often here, but if you're looking for a path to accomplish what the council wants to accomplish versus what the mayor wants to accomplish, I've got the two angels on both of my shoulders here. So, so that I think is what you're facing.
Councilmember Ray.
So I'm going to just put a bow around everything I've heard tonight. And that is, I think we need to have some clarity around what are the policy objectives we're trying to achieve with MetroFlex, or maybe even larger than MetroFlex, because we're starting with a solution, which is MetroFlex, but kind of elevating our discussion and saying, what are our policy objectives? And then I'm going to riff on you, Council President, and how do we measure whether or not we're doing that and being successful in that in the short term and then over the long term? I think that is the first and absolutely essential first step we have to do, because we can't really have a discussion about the question marks until we put a stake through what it is we're trying to accomplish. And I don't know that we have a consensus or even a plurality on what that is. And I know we've got all sorts of things popping up, like we want to do this, we want to do that, we want to do this, but to what end and which is more important? And you know, it is hard to make priority decisions, but I think that's why they pay us the large money, is so that we will be here and make those important prioritization decisions about, okay, this is more important than that, and so we're going to do that. But we've got to nail down what it is we're trying to accomplish in these various areas. And there's three that I ticked off earlier, and there may be more, but there's one about access to the transit system, so the last mile. There's one around equity and providing mobility solutions to those who are in marginalized positions. And then there is one around something else, traffic congestion and climate action. And maybe there's 4 more, I don't know, but those are the 3 that I know of. But I think we got to figure out what they are before we really have any more discussion. Much as I love Mobility and Infrastructure Committee, and I think it's an amazing committee with amazing people on it, this is really a cow discussion. And I think if we have to schedule a meeting to dig into this before the end of the year because we want to make a decision before the end of the year, then I think we need to do that. If we feel comfortable in saying let's let it slide into next year and we'll just go with a contract extension with another 6 month out and looking to do another, what would be another 9 months of it, essentially kicking the can, then I think that's fine too. That's all.
Yeah, I think that timeline portion is the really important one. I agree with your concept that this needs to stay at a cow, but is this something that we feel we can effectively evaluate without an additional staff member, who can really dig into things? Can we evaluate this in this short time period, or how do we feel about, extending a contract and then making the evaluation? Does that make sense?
Let me just have a conversation about that. I don't see how it's really rational to think that we're going to be able to do all the things we just talked about in 3 months, particularly since December is generally a light month. And also because we're going to have new faces here in a month, at least one new face in a month. So I think that, this is one of 6 tonight. I will do my total marts, but I'm just one of 7, but I just don't see how you get this done this year.
Yeah, and the point of, potentially you're looking at new mayor and new council members that, will have to, be a part of the conversation coming forward. Deputy Council President.
Yeah, I'm hopeful this will be a useful comment, but I think we have learned a lot from the implementation of this project. And we started off with the idea that we wanted a first mile, last mile solution, and for particular neighborhoods, Squawk and Tallis. And so we had a very clear definition. And then we put the buses out there, we put out the vans, and actual people started actually using them. And what the map shows us is that they used them in a different way than what we had originally projected. But that doesn't mean that the way they used them was an invalid learning experience for all of us. So I really appreciate what Councilmember Ray was saying about us, and actually I agreed with your 3 points. I think that the target has moved, and it's been moved because actual people were riding in actual vans and telling us what they really were going to do and how they were really going to use the system, rather than the way we were thinking about how they would use the system. So I think we have a lot of data that we've already received, and we've learned a lot from the practical implementation of this project. So I'm not sure that it's going to take a long discussion for us to analyze what we need to do next.
Yeah. And toward that idea, utilizing that data to maybe make some tweaks in the ridership area and then be able to utilize that. I'm going to keep coming back to it because I just think that was a piss poor choice of map in the first place. But I agree that the data necessarily changes the way we look at what the problem is. Councilmember Hall?
So I guess clarifying question then for council and staff is the direction that I'm hearing proceed with renewing the contract, try to adjust the service area and have a deeper objectives, goals, outcomes conversation in the new year. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, I think that's the timeline question is Councilmember Ray said, I don't think we can evaluate this in this 3-month period, especially with December being a light month. And so I think I'm trying to get a sense from the council, do we feel comfortable with doing an evaluation in Q1? What kind of information do we need from that, et cetera?
Okay, and I think this is the distinction. It's not an evaluation, it's the beginning of the process, right? We need to just be clear about what our goals and objectives and then what we're looking for at the end of the contract to be able to say that was a success. Because we're almost the end right now, right? So it's like almost pre-evaluation, preparing for an evaluation. I guess it's all the same thing, nomenclature. But I don't necessarily, if we're all leaning towards, yes, we think we should renew the contract, I don't necessarily see the value in having that conversation before budget, when we could have it in the new year as we go into the new contract. Does that make
Do you
sense?
mean you don't see it needing to have in Q4 2025? Or, because the other option, as we're looking at this, is have a conversation in Q1-ish 2026, figure out what our goals and criteria are, and then figure out a timeline for doing that evaluation with some new data on potentially a new map, et cetera, versus waiting until kind of our budget cycle and doing the evaluation then. Maybe I'm messing things up by adding other timelines, but big question really for the rest of the council members while you think on that is, do we think it's important to do any kind of evaluation in Q4, or are we leaning toward a renewal of the contract with a commitment toward evaluating what our goals are for the service and what the data looks like in 2026? That one, that one, that one.
Yeah, I would say the latter just because, you know, canceling it with no other option does not seem like a good idea at this point, so.
Okay.
And I would also add, again, you know, my frustration is that we didn't have this conversation back in March when we knew that this was going to happen at the end of the year, and now we're kind of in this period where it's like, well, we don't have enough time to evaluate options, where we could have spent the last, like, 6 months doing that.
Feedback received. Anyone else want to chime in on this? Okay. It seems like maybe we're leaning more toward a contract renewal with the idea that we really wish we had been able to do the evaluation in 2025 of what our criteria and goals are, but we are willing to look at that at the beginning of next year.
So again, the challenges you'll have is that the mayor enters into contracts. She would need to put this forward on a council agenda. Currently, the administration is not recommending moving forward with a contract. And so we would need to figure out a mechanism for the council to place this item on the agenda, requesting that the mayor negotiate a contract and place it on the council's agenda for action with her recommendation not to approve. And then the council would have to amend the biennium budget and identify $50,000 of funds for this year. You're then committing a future council to the second year, and so that becomes the first, I guess, $260,000 of the next biennium budget, other than, I guess, what you're contractually obligated to pay to EFR. So those would be the two things that you would be committing to then for the 27-28. So we can convey this information to the mayor. We can work with the city attorney and the city clerk over an appropriate motion for the council to place a contract on an agenda without the mayor's with the mayor's recommendation for denial. Then the council, if it chooses to approve a contract and direct the mayor to sign it, again, pending further clarification with the attorney and the clerk, I think that you could do that. And then the second piece would be to identify funding with the mid-biennium budget amendment. So that's your direction. We'll
Yep.
work with the city attorney and the city clerk for the appropriate motion to direct the mayor to negotiate a contract.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it has to be messy. It's coming through with some council feedback on where we would like to take the budget. And so I think that is an important element of governing in a dual system. So, yes. Any other feedback on these issues? Councilmember Zhang.
I would just like to say to your point that, we're committing to this being in the 2027 budget as well. I would like to make clear that I don't necessarily want to commit to that at this point. I want us to commit to figuring out what we're going to do in 2027 by June 30th of next year so that we have time to pull out of MetroFlex. If we can figure it out by, March 31st and make a decision for the end of Q3 and, do something else starting at that point, I think that would be great too. But we really do need to, figure out what some of the other options are.
And again, Councilmember Jang, members of the council, my understanding is that the contract would be a 2-year contract. There would be language for the ability to cancel the contract, but what would be before the council over the mayor's objection would be a 2-year contract.
Correct, but I do appreciate the feedback of, as much as that is, recognizing what the terms are in that contract that allow for adjustments based on our budget cycle is an appropriate way to respond and consider. And so having
action before the council would be a 2-year contract.
Certainly. But having the feedback from council members saying approval with the expectation that we are able to effectively make a decision by the end of June of next year is setting a set of expectations there, which I think is important as feedback. Okay. Any other pieces of information off of this? Let's see, looking through the agenda. We have, that's a tab. Good of the order. Anything for good of the order? Deputy Council President.
I'm just going to mention that I sat in this morning on the audit exit interview, and it was all very, very good news, and we should be really proud of our finance department. We had a totally clean audit, and lots of praise from the state auditors. So I think that it was very, very well done. Thank you.
Excellent. Any other, Councilmember Joe.
Thank you. Just a brief announcement. I received a message that Christy Gerard had nominated the Issaquah Arts for a Washington State Tourism Award for the Film Festival in the Community Impact category, and they were named a finalist for that award. The awards are going to take place Wednesday, October 8th, between 6 and 8 p.m. Most of us are in a candidate forum, but I thought others could try to watch and see whether or not they win. Thank you.
Council President?
Yes.
Just to let you know, I did hear from Councilmember Martz. He sends his apologies that there was a schedule mix-up, and so he was unable to attend.
Fantastic. Glad that he is doing okay. It is always a question mark when we've got an empty seat of, any traffic-related incidents. Okay. With that, we are adjourned at 8:45 p.m. Thank you.